Hello everybody, welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Jose.
I'm Mike.
And we've just come back from the new Avengers film, Avengers Infinity Wars.
Infinity War.
Yes. I've seen this for the second time. This time I saw it with Mike in IMAX 3D. My first impression was that it had good jokes and it had a few good performances, but it wasn't much to speak of. And actually kind of, you know, I on Twitter, kind of people were so complimentary, and I thought it was kind of cretinous, really, that, you know, kind of you what are you comparing it with that you can be so uncritically worshipful of it. And this time, I was bored witless, and I was kind of almost angry or annoyed because, you know, the thing about the 3D is it makes everything so dark, and to me it felt a little bit like watching like a great Blu-ray, but watching it on 320, megabytes version, right? That's how it felt like watching the IMAX. Anyway, I just hate it.
So it's interesting to think about points of comparison, because I was thinking about has anything been this anticipated before? Has any movie been this anticipated? I was thinking of maybe the Matrix sequels, but not quite.
Yes, there are
Avatar.
many things.
I think the only thing that really comes close to the level of anticipation of this film is when Star Wars came back.
Well, that was the first thing that came to mind.
Probably both times Star Wars came back, actually, 99 and whenever it was, 2012 or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, was this really so anticipated? Because my feeling is, you have one every 3 months or every 6 months. I mean,
that's true. I think it has been, but I think it's built up a level of. There's a level of investment in the story and in the characters that bringing them all together. Remember when the first Avengers came out in, I think, 2012, and that had been like whatever it was, the Phase 1 thing of Marvel's huge world domination plan, and so they'd had like Iron Man and Thor and they Hulk. They'd created these characters and they'd introduced them, and it was a very, very big deal that they were coming together as a team. And it was quite hotly anticipated, and in this one, it's ramped up so much more. There are so many people to bring together and marshalling this huge array of stars.
Mind you, I think in a way it does that quite well. It does bring them all together. It does kind of give them each individual moment, some more than others. The parallel editing kind of thing that it does, so that you're seeing part of one story and then you move on to part of another. And part of another, I thought that was all quite well, except some of the things were just dreary beyond belief to me.
It juggles characters very well, actually. I think it's actually quite elegant filmmaking. The Russos, who directed it, are really good at this, and they seem to have become the sort of de facto people in charge of the Avengers now. It was Joss Whedon for a little bit. And I think they do a really good job here of just juggling everything and actually making a reasonably visually appealing and kind of coherent film. I think there's a little too much shaky camera points for me, especially on the massive, massive screen. It sometimes gets too much. Go on.
Almost the only thing I liked about it was the way that it did kind of bring in all of these characters together in a way that made sense, and the way that it had moments of humor. It was really funny, or not. It wasn't ha-ha, but. There were moments that were really funny and the audience responded to it. So, I think the humor in the film and, kind of bringing out the humor within this really diverse set of characters where you were always clear on, where you were and who was who and what was going on. I think in a way that's an achievement. So it might just be that I hate what... Okay, what I hate is that the characters actually don't make sense together, first of all. You have kind of Captain America and the Black Widow, and you're kind of making them comparable to somebody who's got the power of an Infinity Stone behind them, to Doctor Strange, who can cut through different dimensions, or the witch.
This is something that I was going to bring up as well.
It just drives me crazy.
It's a very clear. So I suppose we should say that there are spoilers coming up. I mean, there's not much to set up other than to say this big evil dude Thanos, CGI character played by Josh Brolin, wants to take over the universe. Wants to decimate the universe. Wants to destroy half of it. Because he's like an evil conservationist, or he's like, kill half their numbers and the rest will thrive, or some fucking stupid thing like that. He's one of these villains that believes he's right, which I was saying when we saw Rampage, I like the fact that they were kind of Rocky and Bullwinkle villains. Yes. That were just like, ooh, good evil plan. Whereas he's much more of a, no, I have an ideology type.
Yes.
And he needs to get hold of these 6 Infinity Stones, which are these kind of small gems, these artifacts that have been mentioned and brought up in the previous films. If you can marshal them all and put them into this big metal glove gauntlet, then he can. Each stone that he obtains gives him powers over a certain sort of dimensional domain of the universe.
That's right.
And altogether,
time and space,
reality, soul, which they don't really explain, mind, and something else, and then all of them together would give him the ability to. Just
to be a god.
Be a god and in control of the universe and do the thing that he wants to do, which is kill everyone, because apparently that will kill half people, because that restores balance. That's this thing of balance.
Yes.
That I suppose is and so basically the whole film is a huge fight. I mean, there's very little by way of sort of the plot sort of changing direction. It's all goes in one direction, which is they are all attacking Thanos at once in lots of different places.
The fights are endless and endlessly repetitive, and there's nothing at stake in them. I felt nothing.
I didn't quite feel that. I thought actually some of the action was very well staged and well directed, and I think that there were stakes. This is actually one. So let's say that is spoiler-free territory done. We will now get into anything we want to talk about.
Yeah.
So, thinking about stakes, what I knew of this film before going in was that it was one half of a 2-part brace pairing.
I didn't even know that.
As I understood it, this was Infinity War Part 1, and there would be Part 2, but I think they're going to give the second film a different name. That's coming out next year. So there was this interesting conflict in that you have a Marvel series, which has been going for 10 years now. Iron Man was 2008.
Yes.
And it's... As you say, like, it's a film every 6 months. It's endless, right? So, but all the advertising around this is going, this is it. This is the end. The fate of the universe finally rests, And even then, like, it's not the end. It's not even the end of the fucking 2-part film series.
Yes.
You go, this is the end, but come back next year for the next bit. So that's it's tricky to sort of... you get the feeling that this is going to be complete placeholder stuff. When films are done in 2 parts, you tend to get this feeling. And even more so with trilogies, where the second film usually has just nothing to offer.
But this is even worse because, and I think now that we're in spoiler-free territory, I can say that half of the heroes in this film die. Right?
Yeah, so Thanos actually achieves his goal. He manages to get all the stones together, and he immediately does it, and just at random, half the characters crumble into dust, literally.
So, and
which is very, very effective.
Well, I don't find it effective because actually that it's temporary. That in the next part, they will all come back.
But do you?
I do.
How?
I can...
Because this is what I was going to bring up. Usually these films have a placeholder feel, and I was really, really expecting that. But one of the things that's really important, one of the characters who dies that is really important at the end is Doctor Strange, because he's the one who can turn back time. And that he's gone means that there's a real feeling of permanence to these characters' deaths.
Well, to me it doesn't feel, because actually the moment where he lost the thing of agape or whatever it's called, the
time stone.
Yeah, the stone that he carries, on his way over, like, as the stone moved, you got the sense that he put a spell on it or something. So, and in any case, you just know that, each of these characters are so financially viable to this huge multinational corporation that they're just not going to throw them away. So actually,
perhaps, but there's also an element of when you realise, when you actually see these characters starting to die, you can tell ahead of time who's going to die and who isn't, based on their it's from each according to his place in the plot to each according to his salary. All the minor characters. Actually, most of the minor characters are the ones who die.
That's not true. Black Panther dies.
I was going to say, Black Panther dies, which is quite surprising.
Yes.
I really didn't expect that. Black Panther's gone, and Doctor Strange is gone, which are two main characters. And as I say, Doctor Strange is important because of the time thing.
There'll be a sequel to Doctor Strange. I'm sure a sequel is already on the way. He's just too big a character.
But I would have said that about Black Panther too.
Of course he is.
It's interesting. So it's curious that basically it feels like much bigger changes are underway than I expected.
No, I don't know, because one of the things you saw in this film is that Thanos reversed time. And actually that's kind of, one of the comic book things anyway. You could reverse time.
Yeah.
So if somehow time is managed to be reversed, then you just go back to 5 minutes before this all happened, make a change, and everything's back to normal.
Right,
and equilibrium is restored.
So the story really requires Thanos to do this. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next time, if that's part of it.
I can guarantee that it'll happen.
Okay.
So, but
I'm not so sure. It does fit.
Okay.
Well, put it this way. It feels like more of an ending than I expected.
Okay. Well, for me, it kind of, it's an ending, but I just didn't feel. So I had this discussion with a friend about you have to judge films on their own merits, and you can't compare this film with Ozu or something. But on the other hand, there are things that you can ask of it. So, you can say, well, was it moving? To me, no, it wasn't moving. Was it exciting? To me, it wasn't exciting. Like, none of the action sequences made my pulse kind of race. The way that other films have done. And were there moments of beauty in it, either through mise-en-scène or through action, or, were there poetic moments? And my answer to all of that is no, I didn't feel anything. And actually, the second time, it was less than I didn't feel anything. I just felt like collapsing. It was so dull.
I feel like the film.
I didn't feel that way on my first viewing.
Right.
To be fair.
I feel like the film is not quite as soulless as that suggests. I think the film has sort of love for its characters, but there are central kind of love stories within it, not necessarily romantic. Also familial love that didn't affect me at all. There's Thanos and his daughter Gamora.
You were meant to be moved.
You're meant to be very, very moved, and yes. I didn't care a bit.
Throw her off the cliff.
There's also Quill, Star-Lord, and Gamora. They're in love, and again felt nothing.
The Vision and
the Scarlet Witch
and the Scarlet Witch. That worked a bit better, though actually it also didn't work as well as it should have.
Yeah, so they're trying to bring in sort of things of sacrifice. There's also a little bit of Iron Man and Pepper Potts. Yeah, a little bit.
Yes, I think they should write Gwyneth Paltrow out of the series. She brings.
Well, they should have shown her dissolving at the end, shouldn't they? But,
yes.
So yeah, none of that worked for me. But maybe that's just if you have a level of investment already, it will work better for you. Yes. They didn't for me.
There was a moment about I don't know when Beyonce did the Super Bowl thing, right? But I love her, and she's got a very soulful voice, and she's very brilliant. Anyway, I love her. But she appeared in this show, and it was like a fucking military march, right? Like there was huge formations of people, and they were doing these very militaristic movements, and. And I thought, this is like a real commentary on contemporary American culture, right? Yeah, an indictment of it, right? This is kind of, entertainment for the nation, and it all has to be huge, and it all has to be loud, and, and kind of all artistry and nuance and love is lost amidst all these explosions and militaristic formations. Mm. And I think there's an element of that in this film for me. It's battle after battle after battle. Millions of things get destroyed, entire planets and, cities and, and there seems to be nothing at stake, right? And I just didn't care.
Yeah, I'm going to say the complaint that you made about Rampage strikes me as much more, it hits home much more in this.
Right.
This is, Rampage I think has a level of awareness of its own silliness that protects it, and it also does do that thing of saying, oh, we are getting everybody out of the city, or we're trying to at least. Whereas this is kind of I feel like it does actually have a level of threat that Thanos is so powerful he can attack anywhere, anytime, and cause huge levels of destruction, which does create a certain level of threat that is feels sort of appropriate and feels realistic almost. But it is so huge and loud and vast. And at one point he just points at a planet and it crumbles, and then he starts firing it at Iron Man. He fires a fucking planet at Iron Man.
And you think, like, this is where all sense of proportion has gone.
Yes.
And just to go back to people's powers, right? Like, Spider-Man is meant to be a teenage kid who's got the proportional awareness and strength of a spider, right? So, yes, he might be able to, like, deal with a tank or maybe a rocket, but not with a god, right? Like,
he's earthbound.
Yes. And that applies to almost all of them. So for example, you can see Black Panther fighting with Captain America or the Scarlet Witch, but then when you're dealing with Doctor Strange and
who
Thanos,
just has access to spells and dimensions.
Yeah, that's right. Who can conjure up entire worlds.
Thor is a god.
A
literal god.
So I mean,
these have always been unwieldy sort of. It's always felt unbalanced in that respect. You think like Iron Man is a guy who has a lot of money and a lot of technology, but Thor is literally a god. How are these coexisting?
That's right.
In this way.
Iron Man is a suit that can fly, and that historically protects in the way that armor does. But like fighting a god, it just makes no sense. And actually, when Spider-Man was putting his little webs on Thanos, I mean, you think, you've got to be kidding, right? Like, so he's just fired a planet, and you're putting your little web on his hand. Like,
there are elements. It's rather like what we were saying about Justice League. Yeah. It was like in Justice League where we were saying that, like, basically the film has to put Superman in like a death coma to keep him out of the story, because once he comes back, he can just do everything the other members of the Justice League can, and so much better. There's no balance there.
Yes.
Actually, Justice League was more sort of believable in that sense, because it didn't really try to make Superman the equal of the others. It was quite clear that he was superior. Whereas in this, you've got Thanos, who, his reality stone, right, means that he can just change shit. He can turn people into sort of like ribbons of carpet. Yes. He can you kind of break them into stones. He can do anything just by thinking it with this stone. So, like, at that point, he has just won. He should have.
Yeah.
He could just go anywhere and just do what he likes, and that's it. You can't stop him.
Film doesn't make sense.
But the film has to sort of make him not do that, because otherwise he wins way too easily.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the film had a few good jokes, and it had a few good images, a few memorable images. The image of Thor opening up the forge, or what you just said about,
characters breaking into stone,
into ribbons.
Yeah.
And things like that. Like, all of that was wonderful. But the last Marvel film that I've seen is Black Panther, which is a truly great film. Yeah, it's a film about ideas. Like, every time you saw it, you saw something different in it. Every time I read something on the film, it made me revisit it. And,
yes.
It's like, kind of, the film, it's like it opened up worlds of thought and experience for you. And this is just like, it's a few good jokes and a couple of interesting images. It's so vastly inferior to a film like Black Panther that it makes one cry, kind of, the current context, really.
I mean, when you go,
because it seems to me that people can't tell the difference between something truly great, like Black Panther. I mean, we're now talking just about comic book films, right? But Black Panther is truly great. This is like a trifle. I'm trying to find out ideas. What are they working with? What are they trying to convey? What does it mean? And I just can't dig anything up.
Yeah, and I'm very wary of actually dismissing it, because when we saw Thor Ragnarok, I think we were too dismissive. There were things that we missed. There were elements of the film was actually talking about colonialism and the way that sort of imperialist regimes paint over their histories to make them look better and to
that
absorb themselves in the scenes.
completely.
Right, I mean, do you remember the thing with the seat that when the sister returns,
yes,
the Kate Blanchett character returns, and she reveals that this great painting on the ceiling, the Sistine Chapel type of painting that's about Ragnarok, not Ragnarok, whatever, the Thor homeworld's past, Asgard. It's actually like she kind of reveals something about this painting that shows no, we have a much dirtier past than this.
Oh, I remember.
Remember that? Yeah. So, and that's something that we basically missed the first time.
Yeah.
It took revisiting it to realise that it was approaching a quite interesting idea there, and so I'm wary of doing that with this, but it really is this basic.
Yeah,
it's just, you might say that it's trying to get at ideas of sacrifice. What like giant superhero film isn't? Yes. Yeah, I mean, sacrifice is the only way they really generate any threat.
Yes.
It's to say you might lose your favourite characters.
Yes. I mean, for me, I really have now seen it twice, and so maybe I'm a dummy and I missed things twice, and that's certainly a possibility, But I love these types of films. I look forward to them. I enjoy them. And like I said, I don't want to give the wrong impression. The first time I saw it, I did enjoy the jokes. I think Chris Hemsworth gives a very funny performance. I like the raccoon very much. I actually think, the actor who plays Spider-Man, has a wonderful moment, where he's kind of being turned into rock, and, you get the sense of a kid and a kid who's suffering. Like, there are, it's not kind of undiluted crap, right?
No.
Like, it definitely has.
I think there's lots to enjoy. I think the story is well told, and as I say, the word elegant does come to mind. I don't think it's kind of Transformers type filmmaking. There is actual craft.
Well, that is the nadir.
Of course, and that's why I bring that up. So that is the ultimate low point for cinema. But and this is nowhere near that. There is actual craft here, and I think it is kind of a visually well told story. As you say, the way it juggles stories and the way it brings you between them and develops these different storylines at the same time is accomplished.
Okay, let's go through a list of characters.
Yeah.
And kind of, tell me who achieved something or what was achieved through this character and where people were completely wasted.
Achieved in what sense?
Well,
plot-wise or thematically, or?
Well, you have these huge stars now, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of, what use did the film make of them? Even in character.
No, I mean that is absolutely true. Like these are characters and stars being thrown at something that you haven't even got time to think about. It's like the film's 2.5 hours long as it is.
Yes.
And I don't think it's over long. It's so stuffed, but there is kind of such a huge fight that you don't have time for anything sort of interactive. I mean, even you certainly don't have time for anything on the level of the allegory of Black Panther or Thor Ragnarok, or even something like Civil War. The Captain America.
Love Civil War.
Civil War had this whole thing about whether we are overpowered. Whether the Avengers, that is, whether we are. Whether we should be reined in, whether we are too powerful.
Yes.
Which wasn't subtextual at all. It was like, that was literally Iron Man and Captain America having that argument with each other.
Yes.
And there's no room for anything even, like, on the surface like that in this.
And I did think, like, I love Scarlett Johansson, and I love the character of the Black Widow. Though, when I remember reading the comic books of the Black Widow inhabited a noir world, right? A world of spies and dark cities and alleyways, and the people that she appeared with, kind of were also people like Daredevil, right? Like, so here in this mega god fight, like, she's wasted. She doesn't even get a few good lines or a good reaction or even a character moment.
No.
Right? Like, she gets nothing. Scarlett
Well,
Johansson.
she gets to say hello to Bruce Banner. They share rapport, don't they?
I mean, Scarlett Johansson is arguably, one of the top female stars in the world at the moment.
It's not arguable, is it?
Yeah, and she's wasted, right? Like, she's given nothing. It's kind of, and actually, I think there's an element of misogyny in this film for those reasons.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
how can you not make better use of Scarlett Johansson?
Well, there's certainly an element of a lot of the fight takes place in space and between planets, and so there's this thing of actually putting characters in place. So, like Iron Man, anyone who's a god or magic can go to another planet if they want. That's fine. Iron Man can because he's got a suit and he provides one for Spider-Man who's sort of with him. Now you'd think that there would also be a way of providing one for Scarlett Johansson's character as well, because she's just as human as Spider-Man, Iron Man. Why didn't she get a look in? She's sort of part of Captain America's gang, and they go to Wakanda and hang out there.
And actually, one of the things that I thought is, you've made this great movie. You've established Wakanda as this magical, fictional universe where all of these fantastic things can happen. And then you fucking throw all of that away for this? I mean... Yeah, I thought it was disgraceful what they did with Wakanda in this film.
What's made of Wakanda is just the shield. It's a hidden place, except it's not hidden because Thanos knows about it and it's got a shield. And again, it's when Thanos' army was attacking the shield, I guess Thanos at that point was off in somewhere else I think he was maybe trying to get the time stone at that point, so he's off in space fighting Iron Man and Doctor Strange. But you think why doesn't he just go there? I mean, for one thing, people in this movie travel very, very quickly.
Yeah.
You have no sense of sort of how far away these places are because people just go between planets like nothing. So you think, well, at this point, like Thanos, if he wants, can just make reality how he likes it. Why does he just open the fucking shield and then just like turn everyone into ribbons? I mean, he's so ridiculously overpowered. It makes it very silly.
You'd think a god would be able to multitask.
Yeah, so in that sense, there is real placeholder stuff because they've made this one character so ridiculously powerful that literally anything he does that isn't immediate genocide seems like he's underutilizing his skills.
Yes.
Which is very silly.
Yeah, so anyway, I think maybe it's time really that we can wrap it up, really. So, I mean, my view, to be fair, the first time I saw it, I quite enjoyed it for the reasons that I said. I loved Chris Hemsworth. I liked Benedict Cumberbatch very much. Tom Holland as Spider-Man had a few good moments. I thought there were moments of characterization that were very witty and funny, and you got a sense of character. I liked, how the story actually kind of brought in all of these, disparate characters. I liked the world, the world that was created in a way. The world where these things could happen seemed kind of legible to me, right? But on the other hand, by my criteria of, what the best of these films do is, I didn't feel there were any ideas going on. When I tried to think about what is the film about, I came up with nothing. When I came up with the question of movement, of me being moved, I wasn't moved by any of it at all. On the other hand, the audience was engaged with it. They responded to kind of, what they saw. And my last thing was that I thought kind of visually, or in terms of mise en scène, there was no poetry and no beauty. Right? So, it's a very slick looking film. You can tell that it cost a lot of money. Yeah. But there was no poetry in it.
I want to mention just briefly that Peter Dinklage was not very good. He's the worst thing about it.
I didn't think he was the worst thing about it.
Yeah, he's certainly the worst actor in it.
I don't think so.
Oh, he's fucking ridiculous in it.
Oh, please, have you seen Hawkman or whatever he was? And actually...
No, he's worse actor in this.
Don Cheadle, in this, I thought...
He's got a lot less to do, and he just talks in his normal accent for once. Whereas Peter Dinklage is doing Game of Thrones up to 11. It's way too much. But what I did like about him is that it's the first time that he's been sort of 25 foot tall.
Yes.
They make
the tallest man.
So he's a dwarf character. He's a dwarf.
But he's a giant dwarf.
He's a giant dwarf. It's actually very interesting. It's a funny little thing I like.
I like that.
It feels... Overall, it feels like a wasted opportunity to talk about the film the way we are doing. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Before we went into the film, we were talking about... We had a long discussion already before we went into the film about the history of the Avengers films and the Marvel series and the way that, for instance, what we've talked about with Iron Man being, the film started off with Iron Man being a normal human with technology, and that's what most of those early films are about. And then you got Thor, who was literally a god, so the stakes have been upped rather. And then you've got Doctor Strange comes in a bit later with the ability to just get into different dimensions, and so like the stakes are upped and upped and upped, where you feel like these aren't what they were anymore. Like they felt sort of quote unquote human. Realistic, human, right? So we were talking about that, for instance, before the film, but then, and we've talked about it now. But the thing is, the way that we talk about these films is only in terms of the internal logic and structure and all this sort of thing. We talk about them as fanboys, basically.
Yes.
Right? And I feel, I think we do the same thing with Star Wars as well. Certainly I do. We talk about it as fanboys. And
you do.
I certainly do.
Yeah.
I kind of can't help it. And I try to talk about it in different ways as well. And this is what I'm trying to get at. Like, so... for some reason, the film that always comes to mind as like an opposite of this is Call Me By Your Name. Yeah. It's like, it's the anti-superhero film. It's just not the same. And you don't look at... When you discuss Call Me By Your Name, and or any kind of small film, really, what you tend to do is you go, the filmmakers have made a decision here. What were they trying to do with this decision? What were they trying to talk about? What was the message? How is it effective? You never do that with a massive, massive film. What you do with a massive, massive film is you say, no, they got this wrong, or this is silly, or whatever. Like we've been saying about Thanos.
I have a theory about that.
Yeah, okay.
So, kind of my theory is that with a film like Call Me By Your Name, you think all these brilliantly talented people, the director, the cinematographer, the screenwriters, have got together to express something, to convey something, to kind of move you in some way. And actually, I do think very distinctly with a film like this, you think, a corporate strategist has figured out a way of developing this asset to bring in X amount of money. That's all, and you're kind of just like a cog in that chain of bringing money to somewhere. I don't think there's anything further at stake than that. And it begins to bother me because you think that was not the case with Wakanda. There was something at stake with the Black Panther. Right, for all of its filmmakers, that went beyond making money. Whereas actually, I think there's no point to Avengers Infinity War except to make money.
Right, but I think that's slightly tangential to what I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about is the way that, despite the fact that we know that these are huge corporate concerns, we buy into it when we discuss it. We buy into the story and we discuss it as though... it didn't make sense that Doctor Strange went here. It didn't make sense that Thanos did this instead of that. That's how we talk about it, regardless of the fact that these are huge money-making things.
Sure.
We don't... We whereas with Call Me By Your Name, we don't say, it doesn't make sense that so-and-so did this.
Some people did say things like it doesn't make sense. Like, for example, people would say, it didn't make sense that in Call Me By Your Name.
Well, the Peach thing certainly came up.
Peach thing came up, but also... that they were so unaware of AIDS and the pandemic, and that it wasn't realistic in that way. I mean, people made all kinds of criticisms about the logic, and actually people hated some aspects of the film because of that logic. Like,
I agree. It does feel different to me.
It is different.
We don't talk about anything else with Avengers. We try to, but all we can really come up with outside of talking about the plot and characters, all we can come up with is. This is huge and destructive and an indictment of modern America, as you keep on saying.
But to me, kind of, irrespective of the kind of filmmaking that it is, and I think, the reason why I'm a huge comic book fan, and part of the reason why I've always defended comic books is because I thought it was a realm of expression in which, really important ideas were discussed. So it was a realm of thought and feeling, in which kind of, what was at stake was what I think all the best films do is meaning and feeling.
Yeah.
and something more abstract than that, which I call beauty, right? That kind of affects you in some kind of visceral way. I think by all of those criteria, which I think you would definitely demand of a film like this, it fails for me. Right? If it's got ideas, they're beyond me. I don't get them. And I wasn't moved, and I wasn't awed. I don't know how to describe it. Like, there are poetic things in films sometimes that just affect you in ways that you don't quite understand, but you've had an experience, and then you try to make sense of it afterwards, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing like that in this. I don't even think it tried for anything like that.
No, I think in a weird way, I mean, it's certainly the case that in any sense like that, this film is a failure. I think that in a weird way, the film is, if it's about anything, it's really about itself. Like, it's come to a point with Marvel where people are so aware of the size of this machine,
yes,
and the idea that, like, this can't end, so how can it end in these final films? That it's really the only interesting thing to discuss is how it's negotiating its own sort of size.
I don't know, though. Okay, so I don't buy into that because, first of all, nothing needs to end, right? Like, the thing is, the Marvel universe has, been in existence since the early 60s at least, right? It never ends. None of the stories ever end. I don't think you need things to be wrapped up neatly or ended, but each of the stories, whether it takes place in individual comic books or part of comic books or, through a year or whatever, there is a story that's recounted, and there's a story in which something is at stake, and it has a theme, and it has conflict, and it is about, people and fear and danger and jealousy and love and, kind of, the basic issues that affect people kind of, in every, that affect all people. I don't know what this was about, except like you say, sacrifice.
Right, but that's what I mean. And so I think actually the only way that the film is really interesting is in how it is about itself. So I opened up with what I found to be the most interesting thing I could think of, which was how the film feels like more of an ending than I expected.
Right.
The way that death kind of pervades the film, even though most of the main characters remain alive by the end. The fact that the villain actually gets his way, importantly, and does what he sets out to achieve, and that a lot of people start dying. That feels important because it's important insofar as this is a huge juggernaut of a series appearing to make some sort of statement or some sort of change.
But to me, it doesn't, because Marvel's contribution to cinema has been that it creates a world. And basically, every film is just an installment of things that can happen in this world, right? So it's quite common in comic books, right, to create a cliffhanger in which everyone dies, and then you reconstitute the world, or there's a spell, or actually it's taking place in another dimension, or whatever, right? So for me, actually, this is just
another
introducing comic book elements, into cinema. So it doesn't feel like the end of anything. It just feels like.
Yeah, maybe.
Part of an installment.
It feels like more of that to me because these films, despite the fact they make so many of them, are enormous. It's not one a week, like a comic book issue.
Well,
but this is also one of the reasons that I never ever got into comics themselves, because the convolution of the storylines and people coming back to life as different versions of themselves and all this sort of thing, and it was so frequent that I never figured out how to make sense of it.
All right.
And if that is the case in the film, like the film feels more important to me because it hasn't, to me at least, seemed to enter the realm of cinema yet. And so that to me makes it feel like it will be treated with more seriousness in the film series. If it doesn't, and they just do a thing where they go, and we can make it up as we go along some more, and bring people back or whatever, that will be actually very disappointing to me.
Okay. So for me, there is absolutely no question that they will bring people back. The question will be which ones they will bring back. I mean, I do think that some will be lost.
And how?
Right.
Is another
the how is always the key.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I was a bit underwhelmed the first time around, and I was just deadly bored the second time around. It was almost like I was bored to inertia. Like I wasn't even impatient or angry or whatever. I was just like, I want this to be over. It's like, you enter a zone where you just want it to end. And I must say, the 3D, with those glasses, was completely ugly, completely dark. It was a diminished experience than watching it, in 2D.
Well, I'm going to go and see it again because I'm going to see it with Matt.
All right.
And so I'll try and make him see it in 2D. I don't think he'll care that much.
Yes.
If not 2D, then 4DX.
Well, not 4DX. I'd be very curious to know what you make of it in 2D, actually.
I think aesthetically it'll make very little difference. I mean, I was again.
I think it makes a big difference.
Well, no, what I mean
hate
is
the 3D.
No, that's what I mean. Like it, in terms of what 3D brings to it. My instinct is that not very much. There's a level of kind of the 3D kind of workflow by this point is so fucking professional in these films. It's unbelievably good to look at in terms of like the way that they kind of create these sort of the solidity of these images. But as you say, like the way in which the image is dimmed because of it might outweigh that, and the idea, the way in which 3D could be used as a compositional tool. I don't think has any impact on this.
No, there wasn't even any attempt to do anything with it.
No, not at all.
So anyway, final verdict.
Yes, I mean you're going to see it, aren't you? As a sort of in that fan way, I think there are some interesting aspects of the story which you obviously take less seriously than I do, or see less importance in than I do. But I am interested to see what will happen in the second half.
Okay.
Next year.
Yeah.
That is intriguing to me, what they will do and whether this will become a sort of rabbit's hole of more stupid comic book stuff, or whether they will do something a little bit more concrete with the story.
Yes. I mean, I think what I want to say is that I love comic book films, and I think I've seen all of them, so this isn't in any way an indictment of them. But actually, I think what also got me pissed off, and I went online, talking about people as cretins, is I also want people to understand that there is a difference, and there are kind of aesthetic criteria about comic book films, right? Like it's not an either or thing, but there is a way in which kind of comic book films can be works of art, and by that criteria, this one falls very far short.
What did you put on Twitter? I'm looking for. You said someone really liked some tweet that you made. I'm finding all the Avengers Infinity worship a form of cretinism. There are good bits and there are fun bits, but if you seriously think this is the best cinema has to offer at the moment, you aren't seeing enough. At best, Avengers Infinity Wars is like one of those big-budget MGM all-star epics, the boomtown of its day, say, and will in all likelihood be remembered in a similar manner.
So something that was very successful, but actually not very much worth thinking about. Though we probably just spent an hour talking about it.
Whereas what I said on Twitter was they should have called it Avengers Game of Stones because of Peter Dinklage. And I googled it, and no one else seems to have made that joke. So I'm claiming that one.
Well, you deserve to claim it.
Yeah, because he really was like fucking straight out of Game of Thrones, wasn't he? He was, I'll make an axe for you, my lord.
Yes, he was very much.
He was rubbish.
I didn't think it was rubbish. I liked it, and I liked the whole conceptualization of the character, and there was a wit in making him a giant.
Yes.
But it was one of those things where it's just a joke, and actually the thing is that cinema, I think is magic and great and art, and it's the best thing there is. And to kind of just offer like a kind of a cheesy joke is to not expect very much of it.
Yeah, although actually I always forget how funny Marvel films are capable of being, and this one did have a lot of laughs, and surprisingly so many of them came from the characters I hate the most, which are the Guardians of the Galaxy ones. A lot of the laughs came from them. And
yes, they did.
But having said that,
Chris Hemsworth was great,
and he was great. But I having said that, I genuinely cheered when Star-Lord crumbled into dust. Sick of him. Can't stand him.
All right. Well,
that's got to do it, hasn't it?
Thank you all very much. We are on Facebook and Twitter and SoundCloud and iTunes. We also very much welcome your response, so kind of please do keep them coming, and kind of we're very happy to answer any questions or queries or altercations that you might wish to engage with. We're happy to fight, so let us know.
Yeah. There won't be a part 2 to this podcast, though.
No.
Jesus, we think we've done Avengers.
We've done
but but the second one is coming out in a year. See what happens.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
One of them things. But next time I over the next few days, I've got to watch 120 BPM because you love it, and it's got to be a fucking antidote to this.
It is.
See what you can achieve with 2.5 hours of film.
Yeah.
2.5 hours. You've seen it twice now. You've watched 5 hours of this.
I've seen it 3 times.
No, Avengers. I mean.
Oh yes.
You've seen 5 hours of this new Avengers.
I only
film.
did this for you, really.
Obscene. No, you did. To be fair, you did say you wanted to go back and see it. I think. I don't think you would have otherwise. I think you would have stayed steadfast.
I think you were the main draw, to be honest.
To see it with me was the main draw.
Well, to see it with you and do a podcast.
Well, we would have done a podcast anyway. We have seen films separately before.
Yes.
I think you did want to see it twice, and the second time has reinforced all the negative things.
You know the reason why is because... so we were meant to meet up to go see 120 beats per minute, and I've been so dizzy recently that I ended up at the wrong cinema, and then actually Mike miscalculated the traffic, so he didn't make it to 120 beats per minute anyway. And I was already at the Electric Cinema, and I said, well, what's playing? And they said Avengers Infinity War is playing, and I thought, since I wouldn't be able to get to the Mac, I just thought I might as well see it. And the fucking Electric is the worst place to see a film like Infinity War.
I was going to say, it's such a mismatch.
It's such a mismatch. It's a small screen, it's not the best place to see these big budget epic films. So part of the reason why I wanted to see it again is because I thought maybe I'm being unjust. Maybe if I saw it in its full glory, in IMAX, at 3D, at Cineworld, it'll change my view of what I saw. Yeah. And actually it was the opposite. It was like a grin and bear it situation. I just kind of waiting for it to end.
But then you think of the Avengers Infinity War is the last film you want to see at a cinema like the Electric. On the other hand, what if you played Call Me By Your Name on the IMAX at Cineworld? And then you
love it.
Oh no, that would be quite good, wouldn't it? I'd love that.
Yeah, I'd love to see,
Why don't they do that,
I'd love to see it on IMAX because you get even more immersed in those, in those people and those faces and,
Because say whatever you like about, the 3D luminosity, but just a film of that fidelity and size, a screen rather of that fidelity and size, that's the way you want to see films, as big as possible.
Absolutely.
Projected up the side of, the Sydney Opera House.
I'd have loved to have seen Call Me By Your Name or 120 beats per minute on fucking IMAX.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
do you remember a few years ago when we went to see Lawrence of Arabia?
That was magic.
At the giant screen in Birmingham.
Yeah. And that was on proper IMAX, not Limax.
Yeah, that was a proper IMAX size screen. Obviously, it wasn't an IMAX film; it was 70 mil.
70 mil.
But full size IMAX, and just astonishing. And that was the first time I'd seen it, and there's no better introduction.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was not. Thank you very much.
Yes. Cheerio.
All right.
Hello, Mike here. I'm just sat editing the podcast at the minute. I'm listening back to it and I'm thinking, what a fucking idiot I am. And I've got to do a mea culpa just to say it's so blindingly obvious that they're not going to kill Black Panther and they're not going to kill Spider-Man. They're not going to kill Strange. I mean, I was even looking. They're making Black Panther 2. They're making Spider-Man 2. They're making something else. Obviously, they're not going to kill these lucrative characters. And Jose's completely right. And I'm a total sucker. And it's just a mark of how ridiculously sort of sucked in I get to these things. I've no way to get out. I can't delete it from the podcast because that would be sort of dishonest and stupid. I've just got to say, if you were sat there thinking this guy's he's a total idiot, then you're absolutely right, and I apologise. Sorry. Obviously, these characters are all going to come back to life. Obviously.